Hey y'all, welcome back. We have a new guest with us today. This little guy. So I was so sick of all the microphone issues that I was having, so I went ahead and got a new microphone and an actual transmitter. That way no more problems with the Bluetooth. It's not going to sound bad. So the real MVP right here. Today's video is brought to you by someone's comment. It was actually my Lewis Carroll video, which if you have not seen that one, I would highly recommend. Some darker elements, but it's a really fascinating story. Really fascinating. If you're new, please subscribe. I'm trying to hit 2,000 subscribers and we're on our way. We're on our way there, so I'm very excited about that. Today we're talking about John Tenniel. Sir John Tenniel was born in Bayswater, West London. For some reason that was a tongue twister. On February 28th of 1820. He was born to John Tenniel. Apparently that's like the only name that we had for boys back then, because this is only the first of many Johns we're gonna hear about today. Just saying. And his dad was this like fencing instructor and like dance master and whatnot. So that's kind of what his dad did. And then his mom was Eliza. John had 5 siblings total. He had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. John was said to be more of an introvert, which I do relate to a degree. This was like his whole life. His whole lifetime, he was this way, and he really wanted to kind of stay out of the limelight. He really wasn't interested in that whole part of it. And he was never really affected like by the fame that he would come to know. Competition didn't really bother him, which to me, it all just sounds like he has this like quiet confidence about himself. Because if you're not really worried about like what everybody else is doing and you're kind of just, you know, honed in on yourself and you don't feel the need to like be over the top about yourself, to me that shows like a quiet confidence. So his family was not very wealthy at all, and so they were not able to afford him a formal education. So he was just sent off to like the neighborhood public primary school. And then what his dad would do, his dad would teach him more of the gentlemanly arts, which would be, you know, fencing, dancing, what have you. Now in 1840, at the age of 20, this is when John was practicing fencing with John. You see what I mean? John Tenniel, the artist, the one that we're talking about, he was fencing, like practicing with his dad, John. Well, his dad's tip off of his foil, which was, it's kind of like the little swordy thing for fencing. The tip fell off. This is like a protective tip that protects against like the pointy end. It had come off and it actually got John in the eye. So his son, it got him in the eye. So over the years, John actually lost sight in his right eye. It like gradually got worse and worse and worse. But the real kicker is John, the son, he never told his dad about the severity of the injury. I was like looking into why. Everywhere it just said that he wanted to protect his father from the guilt of the injury. So that was like the motivation behind that. He didn't want his dad to feel bad about it. And then 2 years later in 1842, this is when John became a student of the Royal Academy of Arts. This is where John would receive like his earliest training for art. While it did kind of nourish his love of art and kind of fostered that, he did say that he had a lot of issues here. He just really disagreed with like their teaching style, and he didn't like their approach or their methods. It was very like observation based, and he felt like it was just very stifling because it was just very rigid. It wasn't his personal style. So it always just felt like it was kind of just going against his own grain. And after a while, he felt like there was just a huge lack of proper education and training here for the students. And so he dropped out himself. And so what he would do is he would just go and study like sculptures, and he would go to live performances at the theater. He would go to the zoo, and he would copy these animals. And what John really liked to do, which I found was really kind of interesting, was he kind of hated having to study a subject. What I mean by that is like a subject, like something to draw. You know, he didn't really like that. He drew from memory. He had a photographic memory. And so what he liked to do is he liked to study something, and then he would go and then draw it from his own memory. That's what he enjoyed doing. Hey y'all, it's future me. Sorry, I'm gonna pop in here real fast and just remind everybody that I am a children's book author and illustrator. These are my 2 books back here. I'm very inspired by the classics. So if you would like a copy of one or both of my books for your kids for this Christmas, everything is linked down below. And then I also do have some items that would be perfect for stocking stuffers, like my Tumblr charms, Kindle charms, bookmarks, all fun stuff. So please check them out down below. Thank you for any support, and let's just go ahead and jump back into the story. Now in the mid 1840s, this is when John has kind of a really great breakthrough moment for himself. He joins this artist group, and I've tried to memorize the name of this group so many times, but I just can't. So I'm going to read it. The Artists Society of Clipstone Street Life Academy. See what I mean? And this was just like a group of artists that got together, and it really just like freed him from like the stifling, like rigid structure from what he was like used to and like how he was being taught beforehand. So here he was like able to really express himself and do what he did the best, like what he liked the most. Here is also where he kind of started diving into like the caricature style, which you're going to see later in his career as well. And he really enjoyed like satirical drawings, which will also come into play in just a little bit. John got his first illustration job for a book in 1842 for Samuel Carter Hall's book. It was the Book of the British Ballads. During this time, this is kind of an interesting portion of history, and I kind of went down this rabbit hole for a little bit. There was a bunch of contests going on for English painters at the time because there was this uptick of popularity of this German Nazarene movement. What the government did was they had like a bunch of contests to like showcase and highlight like English painters and artists. Like I was trying to see like, okay, is this like a political thing? Like what was the point? Like why were people not a fan of this whole style? Well, it really just comes down to, I think, the style itself. From what I could see, people just didn't like the kind of the resurrection of this like really religious, people felt like it was kind of sterile style that was coming back. Where John, he was more so in this direction where he was wanting to bring something like new and innovative and original. And they just felt like this other style was just very like been there, done that. You know, like we've already done this before, let's do something different. One of these contests that happened was in 1845. Now in 1934, there was a fire at the Palace of Westminster. Okay, so they had to like redo it. Well, part of that, they decided to host one of the contests for the artists. So John submitted his art in, and he actually submitted it in late. Yeah, he was late. He was past the deadline, but he still won. He still won the contest. Now, ethically, does that make sense? I don't know. That's a different debate. That's a different debate. But he won. He won 200 pounds. He won the contest. So what that meant was he was able to make a fresco for the Palace of Westminster. And specifically, he was able to do it in the upper waiting hall of the House of Lords. Now, how nice would it be to have like an upper waiting hall? I mean, I don't even have a waiting hall. I mean, that's so funny to me. And here he depicted John Dryden's, another John, a song for St. Cecilia's Day. For a fresco too, I just wanted to include this just in case people don't know, but this is like a specific mural style where you actually put the pigments into the wet plaster. So then that way it kind of like chemically bonds with each other and it creates like a lasting effect. And so you can see this like in the Sistine Chapel, for example. Now we get to the part of his career where he spends a lot of time at Punch magazine. Now, if some of you guys have been watching these videos, you'll recognize the name Punch magazine. This was a huge magazine for a lot of our artists. Very life-changing for a lot of them. Just to name one, A.A. Milne, but there have been other artists where this was like a pretty big magazine for them. Here is where John gets his start here. So during this time, there was a lot of like changes in history and things that he was witnessing. And so he kept up with all of his cartoons that he was doing, very satirical, you know, kind of radical, pushing the envelope a little bit, especially for the 19th century. I don't feel like he had to do much back then to like push the envelope, but he pushed the envelope. So much so that one of the cartoons that he submitted into Punch magazine created a whole firestorm. It was called Lord Jack and the Giant Killer, and it was depicting Lord John Russell like assailing Cardinal Wiseman. Now, Robert Doyle was working for Punch magazine at the time, and he was like a very religious Catholic. Like he was very Catholic. He was so offended by this whole thing, by the fact that it was even put in the magazine and all this kind of stuff. He quit. he up and quit. So what the editor did, which I love this, I absolutely love that he did this, he reached out to John and offered him the job. Now, John actually almost turned this down because he said that he wanted to focus on a higher art. That's what he said. And he was worried that he wasn't funny enough for the magazine. And so he even asked his friends this: do they suppose there is anything funny about me? Oh, golly day, this looks so light. Oh, I don't know how this is going to turn out. We're going to find out. Okay, so John, our John, okay? Our John Tenniel. Our John starts at the magazine and he works with John Leach, and they kind of like worked together. But then slowly over time, our John takes over John Leach's spot as like a political cartoonist. Some of the cartoons ruffled a lot of feathers in the Punch magazine office space. But John claimed that he wasn't prejudiced against anybody, and it was kind of like anybody was fair game. I have genuinely no idea how this is gonna look. He even said, if I have my own little politics, I keep them to myself and profess only those on paper. Okay, blend it out. That was scaring me. So do you remember that little fun fact that I told you about John where he was like blind in his one eye? So mind you, by this point in his life, his right eye is like blind. So this was something that he talked about on his like process for the magazine. It's kind of a longer quote, but I thought it was kind of interesting to see his process for making all the cartoons. He goes on to say, I have a wonderful memory of observation, not for dates, but anything I see, I remember. Well, I get my subject on Wednesday night. I think it out carefully on Thursday and make my rough sketch. On Friday morning, I begin and stick to it all day with my nose well down on the block. By means of tracing paper, I transfer my design to the wood and draw on that. Well, the block being finished is handed over to Swain's boy. So Joseph Swain was the engraver at the time. At about 6:30 to 7 o'clock, who has been waiting for it for about an hour or so. Always the punctual one, we see. And at 7:30, it is put in hand for engraving. That is completed on the following night. And on Monday night, I receive by post the copy of next Wednesday's paper. Although I never have the courage to open the packet, I always leave it to my sister, who opens it and hands it to me when I just take a glance at it and receive my weekly ping. One of the subjects that he goes on to study was William Gladstone, who was prime minister at the time. So he was wanting to study him for a cartoon that he was wanting to do. So he went down there and he studied him, then he put him into his cartoon. Well, William Gladstone was so offended by the way that he was portrayed in this whole cartoon that John was like, never welcome back. So that didn't go well. John was a strong opponent of any parliamentary, I don't even know if I said that right, reform at the time. And John gave this William Gladstone a really hard time when it came to the 1867 Reform Act. Now, the Conservative Party was so grateful for John's voice in the whole thing that they wanted to honor him with being knighted. He was going to have like a knighthood, hence why he's called Sir John Tenniel. Well, what happened was that before he was able to receive such honor, the powers changed in Parliament. So it switched over from conservative to more of a liberal power. But being a good player, John Gladstone did honor this, and that's when John got his knighthood. Now, something that I kind of found interesting was as I was searching through John's life, I tend to kind of get a baseline set of notes out, and then I go back through and I kind of fill in holes. I go in and ask questions on things that I'm like, okay, why is this way? And then I'm looking for things. Well, one of the things I realized, I thought to myself, there's been no mention of like a wife. There's been no mention of kids. There's been no mention of that. So around 1850, he meets this Italian girl, Giulia Gianni. Just so Italian, I love it. Now, the two were married in 1854, but unfortunately, Giulia died only 2 years later from tuberculosis. Now, John was just so distraught. He was so brokenhearted over this. He never married again. He kind of really pulled into himself, and he had a really, really hard time with her loss. Now, John worked at Punch Magazine for quite a while, and he's not done at Punch Magazine quite yet. So don't think he's going anywhere. He is arguably known best for what happens next in his life. So Lewis Carroll writes this book. Okay, now there's a whole history behind this book. Go and watch the other video if you want to see the full history on this other book. Okay, I can't go into all of it here. But he writes this book and he actually starts to make the illustrations himself on this book. Now he takes the pictures to the engraver. He gets recommended from the engraver to hire a professional. So yeah, they were not good, Lewis. Well, Lewis Carroll was a huge fan of Punch magazine, and so he became quite familiar with John Tenniel's work within the magazine. And so the two connected and had a bunch of like really long discussions, and they talked about Lewis's book, and then John was brought on to do the illustrations. So he created 92 illustrations for Lewis's book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. In this Alice's Adventures of Wonderland book, you can see a lot of John's style here. You know, it's slightly grotesque, a little satirical, you know, it's a very fun illustration style that he has. Now, the first run of 2,000 books of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland that were actually released in the US, which I didn't even realize doing the Lewis Carroll deep dive. This was because of the print quality. See, John was not a fan of the print quality. He had issues with it. And so they sold all the books here in the US. So a new edition was released in December of 1865. It has an 1866 date on it, but that was one that was released in like Europe, like in the UK, and it became like an instant bestseller. And of course, this all just, you know, increased John's fame even more. So the two worked together on the sequel of the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland book. I don't know why, but that book is always such a tongue twister for me. They worked together on the sequel, but after this, like John was just not interested in doing like book illustrations anymore. He just didn't really want to do it anymore. He was just done. He was like, no, I'm good. Isn't it ironic that the thing that he did the least in his career is what he is arguably most known for? I mean, if that's not the irony of life, I don't know what is. Oh, I'm liking this highlighter. That's fun. Okay, I'm just gonna finish up my eyes and everything, and then we'll reconvene for the end. Okay, there we go. So John did retire from Punch magazine in 1901. He actually started to lose eyesight in his other eye as well, but John did continue to paint with watercolors until he could no longer see. But then at one point he was just completely blind because of the injury in his right eye and then the eyesight going in his left eye. And then on February 25th of 1914, John died, and he was almost 94 years old. He was just a couple days off from his 94th birthday. So that is the story of Sir John Tenniel. So let me know all your thoughts down below. I'm very curious to see what you guys think of his life. Don't you guys find it interesting that the work that he did the smallest amount of is what arguably he's the most known for? I find that very, very interesting. Also, let me know down below who else you want to see a deep dive on. Make sure you like and subscribe. I'd love for you to stick around, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.